Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
From the Superman building to the old 38 Studios offices to the Dynamo House, there's plenty of empty commercial real estate in Providence. Mayor Angel Taveras wants to change that by freezing commercial tax rates for 7 years and making it easier for developers to get permits. As one of the city's leading real estate firms, Capstone Properties has a bird's-eye view of the situation. Its new report on the health of the market finds a growing appetite among investors for properties of all types after a huge drop during the recession. This week on Executive Suite, taking the pulse of Rhode Island real estate with Capstone Properties Vice President Neil Amper. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Neil, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And people might not have ever bought anything themselves from Capstone Properties, but bet if you think about it, folks, you've seen their signs on buildings for sale, sometimes on lots, especially this lot in Providence where I live, and all over the place. So you might be more familiar with them, what they think. But for those who aren't, you describe yourselves, Capstone Properties, as a real estate services firm. What does that actually mean? What do you do day to day?
We're a full-service firm. We do brokerage, which means we lease as well as sell office, industrial, retail properties. We also have a management aspect to the firm that manages buildings, provides detailed reports, and we also do construction management as well as some development.
So really the whole spate of how real estate works, you have your foot in all different parts of it.
Correct.
So if you could give me an example, talk about, I think you were involved in the C.J. Fox building. Everyone knows the Fox on the side of Route 95. That was just sold, and you were intimately involved with that. What was Capstone's role?
Yes, we were hired by the C.J. Fox company to market the building. And by marketing the building, our job was to find that person who could utilize the building either for conversion, although it'd be unlikely that they would use it as a manufacturing plant, which is what that was. They made labels and tags. And Omni Properties, who is a major property owner in that area, bought the property and is going to convert it to office space.
Let's talk now about the Capstone Report. This is something you write it twice a year. This is just my printout of it, but you can get it on their website, capstone-properties.com. It's free to download, and it's a great resource. Twice a year it comes out to give you sort of take the pulse of the market. And to get started, we have a chart right out of the report that I'd like to show, and it'll give you a sense for the people at home of how the market has changed since 2007. That's 07 to 12, and you see that huge drop, 07 to 09. You know, the office, the green, almost disappeared in that era, and now you see it starting to come back. That's through 2012, but still not at the levels we've seen back then. I mean, what have the last couple of years been like for commercial real estate?
Well, as you can see from the 07, that was the top of the market, and it was top in the country, basically. After that, you had the collapse of the residential market, which impacted the commercial market. And 08, 09 were very, very difficult years. And little by little, we've crawled out of this morass. I mean, it's never going to be like 07 in the near future. But every year we've improved. Every year prices have improved a little bit and sales were a little bit easier. It's just a little bit better every year, and including this year that the small user / investor / buyer of whether it's industrial or office space, it's now back in the marketplace.
Which is a big change from what you were seeing a few years ago. That small side of the market just disappeared.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
You describe in the new Capstone report, 2012, you called it a year of contrasts. What did you mean by that?
Well, as I said, the small user has come back in the market. There were 9 sales in Rhode Island last year of over $5 million. It's very unusual to get that many sales. And there were 55 sales of properties underneath $500,000.
So a significant number on both ends.
That's correct.
For this market.
That's correct. And in all different categories. It wasn't just industrial, it was office, it was retail, it was a little bit of everything. And that's what drives the market. When you have that diversity, it's not just one driver. Can't be.
And that, just to get people situated, right, as you saw, probably that chart was broken down in three ways. You break down the market as retail space, office space, and industrial space. Office and retail people understand, what does industrial mean here? Industrial being in the dark gray on the chart here.
Well, industrial would be warehouse space, would be manufacturing space. Some of these buildings might have been converted to office space. That's happened over the last few years. Some of the older jewelry buildings that are not good warehouse buildings now can be office space. So there has been a fair amount of that, but that's kind of what the market is industrial.
Now, big picture in the report, you say the statewide vacancy rate has been consistently around 8% the last few years. It inched up to 8.2% this year. That's kind of interesting. You're not really seeing much movement in the overall vacancy rate. Is that sort of a false stability because you see a lot of change in the three categories?
It's a little bit, it's not really a false sense. I mean, really the marketplace has stabilized. We're not falling, the rates, the values are not falling. You know, there are certain circumstances where they will, but for the most part, across all sectors, it's pretty much stabilized. Not every sector has dropped, or not every sector has gone up, but it's pretty stable now.
Now, of course, stable doesn't mean the same, right? Because how would you compare the market of 2007 to the market of 2012 in the commercial real estate sector?
Well, 2007, all you had to do was be alive. All you had to do is, you know, be breathing, and you made transactions. I mean, that's what commercial real estate people do. In 07, 08, 09, and 2010, there was a challenge to find that person who could use the building, who could get financing, who had the down payment. There was a lot of factors involved to make that transaction happen.
A lot of deals were being discussed, I remember, but often weren't consummated. A lot of phone calls going around.
That's correct.
It's amazing in some of the variations in what people are paying right now that you see in this report. You mentioned two in Providence. 95 Chestnut Street sold for $37 per square foot. 15 LaSalle Square, used to be Blue Cross, it's now Hasbro, $220 per square foot. So $37 at 95 Chestnut Street, $220 over at 15 LaSalle Square. What's behind that kind of variation?
Well, the Chestnut Street was a foreclosure. The building had a high vacancy. Parking was limited. Location was very good. Part of the highway was coming down for the 95 land. And there was a developer / investor who saw the opportunity and was willing to put his capital into it to bring it back. That is where Beta Spring is. That's one of the incubator forums that we have in Rhode Island. And it's a very good location for a lot of people. It's right on the edge of the jewelry district. You can walk to downtown. And somebody saw the opportunity, and coincidentally enough, he was from out of state. He was from Massachusetts. And the Hasbro situation, Hasbro rented the entire building. They are Class A tenant, and a REIT out of Chicago.
REIT being an REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust.
Out of Chicago bought it with a long-term lease in place. Mm-hmm. So they looked at it as an institutional purchase, which you don't see much around here. Most of it's small entrepreneurial buyers who see an opportunity in the market and looking to do value added.
Interesting. So we're going to talk a lot more about specific projects, the Superman building, the Dynamo House, and we'll have the results of a survey Capstone did specifically for this episode of Executive Suite. Stick with us. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and I'm joined by Neil Amper, Vice President of Capstone Properties, real estate services firm in Providence, a prominent firm. Look for their signs all over on parcels and other buildings that are being sold. Neil, one of the interesting things we've seen in the last few years is, I sort of call it the spring slump, where the first quarter seems like the year is going to be normal in the real estate market, and then the middle two quarters from about April to September are below normal. Then it kind of comes back in the fourth quarter. You say that's happened 4 years in a row as of 2012. Are people worried there'll be that phenomenon again this year, 2013?
Well, it's, worry is the wrong terminology. What happens is gets to be a little bit of pent-up demand that sometimes gets filled early in the year after people have done their taxes and finished the year and have done what they think they want to do in terms of their infrastructure. Then they sometimes say, well, maybe I should buy a building, and that sometimes happens after the first of the year. The slump, there's no rhyme or reason for it. Residential properties have a different life cycle in terms of when does the school year begin. That doesn't happen in commercial. Commercial, it's when somebody needs a building, when they have that need that has to be filled. Summertime generally is a little bit slower. I mean, June, July, and August tend to be a little bit slower just because of vacations, but there's no real season for commercial.
Yeah.
It's just what happens sometimes.
Different from residential.
Right.
I want to talk about retail. Retail building has fascinated me the last couple of years. First and foremost, what are we looking at with the vacancy rate statewide in retail right now? What's the health of the retail market
Well,
at
the
moment in
market,
Rhode Island?
the retail market in Rhode Island has been stagnant for a number of years, around 7 to 8%. Big boxes are still available up and down Bald Hill Road. The Shaws closed on Bald Hill Road. Bed Bath & Beyond moved from one side of Bald Hill Road to the other. Hobby Lobby, which was a national company, moved into the old computer place. That's a new company into the marketplace that we haven't seen. And Win Stanley Development bought the Rhode Island Mall, which is very significant because that's been vacant for a number of years. And that's what I was talking about, a value-added investor who looks at that and says, I have 450,000 square feet sandwiched between Sears, Kohl's, and Walmart. Someone must want to come there.
There's something you can do.
There's
proactively.
going to be traffic there.
Yeah.
So he looked at it, paid a reasonable price for it, and he's going to redevelop it. He's a first-class developer. He's not an institutional developer. He's a value-added developer.
My friend Patrick Anderson, who's the real estate reporter at Providence Business News, a great reporter. I hope you all are reading Patrick. He had a story last year about the future of big box stores, and it sort of asked the question, what is happening and what's going to happen with old suburban retail space, strip malls, malls themselves, big boxes? I mean, I look around, you see Blockbuster's empty, Circuit City disappeared, briefly someone will move in, then they disappear again. You know, and with the rise of Amazon, you wonder how much demand there'll be for those big box stores. I mean, what's the outlook the next 5 years?
Well, with the big boxes, you're talking about how much does it cost to operate that space in the course of a year. And at a certain number, it makes sense for someone to buy that, to lease that space, or to buy the property and redevelop it into something else. There's been experiments around the country, these big boxes, breaking them up to 4 units or 3 units or 2 units and putting smaller people in there. Win Stanley expects to break up the Rhode Island Mall into many spaces, not small spaces, but like 6,000 square foot spaces. That's what he stated. So instead of the small user, now you're going to have the medium-sized user. It could be a restaurant, could be something else.
And you've said you've seen more demand for small retail spaces, the new Froyo, frozen yogurt kind of places and stuff, than you're seeing like a big a Costco coming into Rhode Island or a bunch of Trader Joe's. We still only have one Trader Joe's to my sadness.
Yeah, well, the smaller user is taking advantage of the marketplace. There's space available, the prices are pretty good, and they're setting up their business to take advantage of that. Now, as far as the bigger boxes, that's just more problematic. The bigger it is, the harder it is to lease.
I want to move quickly because we run out of time in this segment to the industrial market, those big warehouse spaces and others. It looked like a pretty solid year. Transactions were up, though value was down a bit. What's the outlook right now in the industrial market after last year?
Industrial market is always a fluid market. The warehouse has been the marketplace for the last 3-4 years. Manufacturing has compacted a little bit, but there is still manufacturing in Rhode Island, and there's still people who are setting up shop and manufacturing and actually growing. Contrary to everybody's belief, jewelry still exists in the state. They're still manufacturing some jewelry. Alex and Ani's manufacturing in Rhode Island. Everything they do is sourced here. So the marketplace, while as far as industrial manufacturing is certainly compacted, as everywhere, it's not dead.
It's not dead.
No.
No. All right, well, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll have the results of that survey Capstone Properties did, and we'll talk about the future of the Superman building in Providence. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and I'm joined by Capstone Properties Vice President Neil Amper. And Neil, you were good enough to do a survey of some of your clients, some of the people you work with in the commercial real estate market, and some interesting findings here. Let's start with, what is the most significant barrier to your growth in 2013? Your results show only 5% of your respondents, you surveyed about 150 people, said financing. And it was 40% said customer demand, 23% pricing pressures, 14% legislative pressures, taxes at about 16%. What do you make of that?
Well, what was the impediment to doing transactions in Rhode Island, and in fact the country, was financing. It wasn't until recently...
The credit crunch we talked about.
The credit crunch. It wasn't until recently that the marketplace has started to come back, not coincidentally, because banks are willing to lend. I know it's changed because bankers are taking me to lunch. I mean, that hasn't happened in years. So, so financing is not a problem. You have programs to do that, which is a 504, 10% down program. It's an SBA program, and those are very available today. But people are still concerned about all the issues that everybody knows about, which are the taxes, which are the legislative issues that the state suffers with, as well as customer demand.
40% here, the biggest plurality for customer, just final sales, the most basic part of an economy.
That's right.
Another interesting thing, you looked at the current operations. You asked, if you plan to expand your current operation within Rhode Island, what type of property would you consider? What did you see here?
Well, if when you look at it, it's spread out pretty evenly between relocate and renovate in the existing facility, which means they're renting and they're going to expand in that facility, or they're going to expand their add-on to their building, or they're going to purchase a historic structure to retrofit, or they're going to build a completely new development, because some of the people we surveyed are developers and some are investors. So it's pretty broad-based. Everybody is thinking about doing something, and that's the beginning of the end of the real estate demise in New England to begin with.
Also, one other interesting thing in here, I saw if the company plans to increase spending in 2013, in what areas, you'll be sad that real estate wasn't number one on here. It was 53% said technology, 40% employee compensation and training, 26% on real estate. And I know people could pick more than one, I think, in some cases,
that's
right?
correct.
So that's
that's
why
right.
those numbers are up. So is that interesting to you? Do you think that's a sign of maybe people being a little cautious because technology might be less expensive?
Well, we're hoping that when they're talking about employee compensation and training, that they're hiring new people, that 26% will turn into new purchases or leases.
That's right, because they'll need the space once they hire those folks. I mentioned I wanted to ask you about the big debate going on over the Superman building, one of the biggest buildings in Providence. Bank of America just left. There's talk now about potential tax credits, about turning it into apartments. You see it there on the screen. Well, first of all, just what do you know? I should say you're not representing the Superman building, but what do you know about that property? Would that be a challenging one because it's so large to get enough tenants?
Yeah, that building is antiquated. The systems need to be completely upgraded. The floor plates, which is for the size of each floor, it tapers down. So if somebody wanted to come in, like a 50,000 square foot office user, they might have to be on 5 or 6 floors, or maybe 7 floors. And that's not good business today for office users.
A lot of elevator trips.
A lot of elevator trips, a lot of steps up and down. So that's a challenging, I mean, we don't know where that's going to go. There's a lot of people talking about it. A lot of people within the state are trying to figure out what's the best method there. Apartments, maybe, but that would be the most expensive retrofit because now, now you're dealing with kitchens and bathrooms and entrances and exits, and it's a challenge, and nobody's going to come up with one complete answer. The owner is a out-of-state investor from the Boston area, and whether it's a combination of apartments, condos, hotel, office, destination retail.
I know you keep an eye somewhat on the residential market because it impacts the overall amount of space. I mean, is there a significant demand right now for the sort of residential space? That would be bringing quite a few apartments onto the market in downtown Providence if that entire building was turned into apartments.
I think the number, I think there's 2,700 people living in downtown Providence now. We're in that range. That's over 300,000 square feet. That's a lot of people to move into one building to live.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could fill with all apartments.
So it's certainly something that would need to be researched before you do anything with it. We're also having a lot of talk with policymakers right now about bringing back the historic tax credit. It seems like it's going to happen. Everyone at the State House says they want it. That was frozen in 2008. What was the impact you saw of it freezing, and do you think it would have an impact if it came back?
Well, the historic tax credit specifically was designed for older mill-type buildings, multi-story buildings that had lost their usefulness for manufacturing.
One example being the Dynamo House in Providence, right?
Well, yeah, Dynamo House, but that's a little bit different. That was a power station, and that's a whole completely different set of circumstances. Now you're dealing with ceilings that are 50 to 60 feet high, as opposed to 12 or 14 feet high in a mill building. But the mill buildings, with that historic tax credit, brought a lot of buildings into residential, some office, and raised the tax base on that particular building. Now, mill buildings were selling in the beginning of that cycle for $1 and $2 a square foot. By the end of the cycle, they were selling for as much as $25 or $30 a square foot because the historic tax credits made it worthwhile for them to do that.
Do you think that would happen again if it came back?
It might.
It might.
I mean, it's you can't tell. I mean, there's still a lot of buildings out there that could use retrofit. All through Providence, all through Pawtucket. They're doing some conversions down in Coventry. So there's a significant amount of structures left in the state, and the question is, what's the market for it? And I just don't know at this point.
And we'll leave people with that question because that's all the time we have this week. Neil, thank you so much for joining me, and I want to thank you for watching this episode of Executive Suite. If you want to download his report, we'll link to it on WPRI.com. That's where you can also catch every episode of Executive Suite. We'll see you next week right here.